I've lived in apartments for most of my life, and for me, it's always felt a little safer. Like I have more control over things, and there is less room for the imagination to run wild. But when I got married and we decided that we wanted a place of our own, we decided to buy a house. I'm not fond of living in houses, especially the ones that are very old. We can never truly know its past or full history, if only the walls could talk. The first thing you notice when you step into a house is the vibe it gives off. The sound of the floors creaking when being stepped on, or the way the wind blows outside. You want to know if anyone has died in the house or on the grounds of where it was built. Well, we finally found the perfect house, or so we thought. It seemed very lively. The family that used to own the house was a family of 5, a husband, wife, 2 boys, and a girl. When we first stepped into the house with our agent, it was full of light and love. Parts of the house were recently renovated, including the living room, which had a stunning fireplace. Their belongings were still in every room because they were waiting to sell the house before moving. The agent kept saying it would be the perfect place for a first-time homeowner, and when I asked about the history, she said there wasn't anything unusual about the place. On the day of closing, the family was moving their stuff out. I noticed the sons and daughter crying, saying they didn't want to leave. I took this as a good sign, knowing that the previous owners adored and were attached to the house. Before leaving, the mother approached me and said that they were all sad to say goodbye to the house, but they needed a fresh start. I parked my car and stared at the empty house from the outside. It looked a bit sad, and I kind of felt like everything had changed. I couldn't quite explain it. I made my way inside and felt chills run up my spine. I walked around a bit and stared at all the empty rooms. It was no longer happy. No love and no light. There was one room in particular I did not like. We turned it into the guest bedroom so that way I'd never have to go inside. Whenever I passed by that room, I felt like I was being watched, but for some reason I couldn't avoid it, and my eyes would end up peeking inside, so I always left the door closed. Until one night, my husband and I were arguing. It was around 1 a.m., and I decided to sleep in the bedroom across from the guest room. I noticed that the door was open. Maybe my husband went in earlier to get something. We were still in the process of unpacking. I brushed it off and closed the door. I still felt like I was being watched, but since I was so stressed out about the argument, I laid on the bed and fell asleep, angry. It was around 3:30 a.m. when I woke up. I heard my doorknob turn and the door slightly open. It startled me, but I thought it was my husband going in to apologize, so I pretended to still be asleep. I waited a few seconds, thinking he was going to crawl into bed with me, and then I heard a voice, and it was not his voice.
Where do I go now?
It was a girl, maybe around 4 years old. I was terrified. I thought I was still dreaming, so I pinched myself under the covers as hard as I could to wake myself up. And that's when I heard footsteps coming closer to the bed. I felt cold air through the blankets even though the heater was on, since it was winter. I decided to be brave and see if I could try to turn on the lamp beside the bed. I told myself that on the count of 3, I'd do it. I started to count down. 3, 2, 1. I threw the covers off me only to find a little girl. Her eyes were all red from crying. Her hair was long and black. Her body was covered in scars. She was wearing what looked like a nightgown, except it was covered in ash. She looked at me, and I looked at her. She then proceeded to ask me again.
Where do I go now?
And started coughing. I rolled out of bed from the opposite side and ran to my husband. I woke up the next day thinking it was all just a nightmare. I decided to put stuff away in our attic. As I was putting a box away, I tripped. When I looked down, I saw a floorboard that was sticking up very slightly. Very odd. I called my husband over and he lifted the floorboard only to find a secret compartment. Inside, there were little toys along with a metal frame face down. I picked it up, wiped away the dust, and only then did I realize that it was not a dream. I recognized the girl. She looked so happy and full of life. I decided to call the previous owners of the house in hopes of finding out more. This had to be their photo, but whenever I called, it went straight to voicemail. I brought it up to my husband, who admitted that sometimes in the middle of the night, he'd randomly wake up and hear a faint voice along with coughing coming from the living room. We finally had enough when I woke up to the smell of smoke and found tiny embers in the fireplace. I told him that we couldn't live there anymore, but I decided to contact a medium. The next day, she came over to our house and immediately felt a presence when she entered. She closed her eyes and started talking to herself while walking around the living room, and then teared up while standing in front of the fireplace. She asked if I had seen the little girl. I was speechless. She was quiet for a few minutes, then started reciting a prayer in Latin. She looked at me and said that the spirit of a little girl was stuck inside the house and that we needed to help her. She asked if there was anything in the house that she left behind. I immediately remembered the secret compartment in the attic and grabbed the photo and toys. I gave it to the medium. She lit up a white candle, took out a crucifix, and she started praying for protection, asking her guardian angels to set up rings of fire to shield the space from dark forces. Immediately, I felt a small gust of warmth. Next, she asked them to send down portals of light. The medium spent time asking the girl questions like if she knew she was dead and if she was ready to move on. The girl is reaching out for help. She is overcome by guilt for disobeying her parents. She is full of sadness because her family left.
Where do I go now?
I heard her little voice again. The medium spent a while reassuring her that she no longer had to worry because her family loves and forgives her, and that she is free to cross over. With the portals open, the medium asked her guardian angels to help the little girl cross over to the light. The room vibrated, then went completely silent. After a few minutes, I asked her what happened. It seems that Suzanne wasn't able to rest after feeling so much guilt with her family selling her home and moving away. This often happens. Souls can return to familiar places when they are lost, but don't worry. She is now in a place of love and warmth. After giving it some thought, I contacted my real estate attorney and decided to back out of the sale for misrepresentation of the house. It wasn't too difficult considering I work at a law office. After further investigation, we found out that the little girl was the previous homeowner's second daughter. She had passed away after making s'mores in front of the fireplace with her siblings when their parents weren't home. Her nightgown caught on fire, and when the firemen arrived, it was too late. She had asthma, and the smoke had reached her lungs. She passed away in the hospital from an asthma attack. Her siblings survived with minor injuries. I'm glad we helped the girl cross over and that the ghost wasn't a vicious one. But for now, my husband and I decided to move to an apartment again. We might buy a house in the future, but only if we do extensive research on the property beforehand. You never truly know what comes attached to a house.